Everybody's here. Well, thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon. We are here today to outline the basic contours of the Senate school funding formula. I just want to caution everybody, this is still a work in progress. We are finalizing the data in advance and unveiling our omnibus budget on Tuesday, but since we have presented the foundation concepts to both the administration and our colleagues in the House, we wanted to inform you as well. Our fundamental goal of this process is to keep the governor's basic framework while expanding on what the House did to improve that plan. Our focus is to adequately care for the educational needs of all Ohio children. The Senate plan increases state investment in education overall and spreads resources among more districts. The Senate plan also lowers the number of students on the guarantee over the biennium. The Senate plan builds on additional education funding provided by our colleagues in the House, making the legislative commitment to education nearly $750 million, or more than $717 million, higher this biennium over the current biennium. That's an 11% increase to public school districts over the biennium, 11%. In fact, that is the largest increase as a percentage for the last 10 years or longer. Finally, as I mentioned, this is the largest investment, and it's important that we're talking about investment in those numbers I gave you to money that's going to K-12 school districts, the 600 plus school districts around the state. While we are also investing in other aspects of education, and some of my colleagues have talked to those in more detail, the numbers are even larger when you consider the total education spend. But that $717 million is just direct aid to school districts, Ohio's public school districts, making it the largest of any General Assembly commitment in the last decade. I want to ask Senator Widener, our President Pro Tem, to give us some more additional details and run through some numbers. Chris?
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank all the other members that are here today. This has been a joint effort on our part in the Senate to, as the President said, take the governor's concepts of a basic grant aid number and build upon that with categorical line items that actually drive dollars to all of our students throughout the state depending on their needs and their specific districts. So the numbers that we're submitting to you today and discussing, and again, I want to reemphasize what the President said, this is the foundation funding formula line item. This is not anything else in the Department of Education, which, as many of you know, as you read through those pages of the spreadsheet, are considerable adds to the foundation funding formula. First, we start, as the President said, building on what the governor and the House did. The governor, as those detail among you may know, started with an equal yield formula, which focuses on millage, whereas the House converted that thinking to an equalized percentage, in other words, identifying a state and local share percentage, much like OSFC did at the beginning of that program well over a decade ago. We continued then with what the House did in an equalized percentage process, and we believe made it even better. The dollars per pupil in an equalized percentage formula is what drives the equation. And our proposal is $5,745 in FY14 and $5,800 in FY15. That starts the basis of the formula, which is an increase of a number than we've ever seen before in the legislature. In doing so, as the President said, this drives an additional $284 million in FY14, again, going specifically in the foundation funding formula line item to our public school districts in Ohio. That's what we're speaking of here today. And $434 million in FY15. Combining those percentages, as the President said, that's 11.1% over FY13 basic aid in the foundation formula line item. Another couple things that we want to emphasize, we continued with those adds that the governor started in the conversation, in particular the economic disadvantaged factor the governor started with. The House improved on that, and we believe we've improved on that even more. Our focus here was comparisons to previous years and what that did or did not include in previous years, i.e. all-day kindergarten, for example, was an item that we spent a great deal of time in analyzing what this formula would do as compared to previous formulas in previous years. We then spent a great deal of time on the third grade reading guarantee. The House named this K3, I think in the description of their budget, many of you know. All in total, the legislative and administrative proposal now has $207 million in the biennium focused on the K3 initiative, i.e. promising that our third graders by the third grade have the resources they needed in all those years in our local school districts throughout the state of Ohio. We in the Senate added $54 million to that specific line item, and again, in addition to what the governor and the House had already done. Our formula enhancements also raised the caps. The caps are where districts are able to go in terms of funding that would be driven through this formula. Our numbers were 6.25% in FY14 and 10.5% in FY15. This begins to let the formula flow, you might say, through more districts and throughout the state of Ohio. We also then, besides caps, look at the number of schools that are on the cap, because ultimately this is your glide path to the next biennium budget. I think it's something the administration talked about both in their proposal and the House proposal, but ultimately our proposal we present in our omnibus budget on Tuesday is 176 districts on the cap by FY15. And as you can see, that is probably, that is most likely a number that's on the glide path to address in the next biennium budget that the administration might present. So those are some of the major elements of this particular proposal. Again, we want to focus on, we're talking to you today about our foundation funding formula line item and those specific elements of adds to the basic opportunity grant number that I mentioned with you that we're going with in our proposal. And I'd next like to introduce Senator Gardner, who's going to talk a little bit more about a couple other initiatives we spent some time and energy on in our plan as well.
Randy?
Thank you, Senator, and good afternoon. As the chair of the subcommittee on education, both primary and secondary and higher education, we spent many hours and heard from nearly 150 witnesses on a variety of topics. Only a couple of those are a subject of today's press availability. But I did want to thank the members of the subcommittee that are here. A number of them are here with us, and we worked very hard at it. We heard from a lot of diverse groups, organizations, school leaders, parents, business leaders from the state, and including some very meaningful testimony from the administration on some of the priorities that the administration had before us. A couple issues that I would like to just briefly message, and I think the first reaction to what we're going to be able to do in early childhood education is 4 years makes an awful lot of difference. 4 years ago, I remember one of the headlines was Ohio slashes early childhood budget. And today, we are to announce that we are going to make additional investments in early childhood education, $30 million of investment over the biennium for early childhood education support for pre-K. This will be high-quality education, early childhood education. And I would like to acknowledge the leadership of the chairman of the Senate Education Committee and the vice chair of the Finance Subcommittee. Senator Peggy Lehner is with us, and as many of you know, has championed this issue, not just this year, but for many years, and helped us provide a framework that we can build on over this biennium to really make early childhood education work for us in Ohio. Some of our most compelling testimony in our subcommittee came from both business leaders and teachers and advocates in the field, and so we're pleased to be able to at least make this additional next step in helping our youngest learners. The other issue that you've heard quite a bit from the governor about, and so have we, is the Straight A Fund. And while work continues over the weekend on this particular issue, we are pleased that we're going to be able to invest more in the Straight A Fund. We appreciate the governor's leadership. The subcommittee heard from school superintendents and school board members and others also that this was a real opportunity to find innovative ways to increase productivity, efficiency, and achievement in our local schools. And so we agree with the governor, and we will attempt to provide some additional funds beyond the House version of $150 million. We believe we can add to that in a meaningful way to provide real opportunities for change and innovation in our local public schools. So with that, I am pleased to join the leadership team and the other members who have worked hard to get us to this day. There are additional days ahead, and much of the work of the subcommittee, some of the work at least, is already evident through our substitute bill, and there may be additional issues to address next week. But for now, I wanted to accentuate those two in which the Senate was able to do more to help children in Ohio. Thank you.
Thanks, Randy, and the rest of our colleagues here. I think the time has come to open up to some questions. So, questions? Yes, ma'am. Yes, they are. The transportation formula, Chris, help me out here. I think it stayed essentially the same as the House. The career tech formulas, the plan now, and this is again one of those areas that we think we've landed, but there's still some chance for adjustments. The House did a formula, an index percentage. We went to regular dollars, and that is about $1 million a year or so more to go to dollar certain instead of a formulaic index. But we think it's easier for school districts to have a set dollar amount on those formulaics.
When you talk about the brace caps for school district funding, the 6.25 and the 10.5, are those based on 2013 levels?
It is 2013 levels.
Why did you pick those two numbers?
Chris?
You know, I think, again, as we were looking at enhancements, the House had 6% and 6%. We saw, as we began to do some things in their proposal, building on the governor's proposal, that we could equalize even more dollars to all districts throughout the state if we used higher caps. And ultimately, we were able to do that. And I think as you all get a chance to see the spreadsheets later today, you'll see that was the case.
How many districts are on the guarantee?
176.
No, that's okay.
And no, that's guaranteed. In fiscal 15. So the number on the cap,
Number of districts on the cap is 242. The number on the guarantee is 176. I might have misspoke about that. I'm sorry, I might have transposed those.
which is at least a recent term record on the guarantee. I mean, the number on the guarantee is fairly low. It's- Guarantee 176.
Cap is 252. 242, sorry.
242.
Fine print
Right.
at the end of the biennium by FY 15.
Can you talk generally about what types of districts will maybe benefit more than others from changes you made?
Unless it's a district on the guarantee, frankly, most school districts in the state are going to benefit. It is a significant investment across the spectrum.
Where did you find the money for all of this?
Excellent question, and the best answer is what we used was essentially the available capacity that we had through the GRF changes that we anticipated in caseloads and other numbers that we had available. This is where we invested our dollars in the Senate. We made some other changes, but this is a significant investment. Frankly, this is most of the Senate investment. We also did some other things. What is it in the lottery proceeds?
For the other programs,
For some of the other
straight
programs.
A and others.
Yes.
Besides tweaking the cap and the base per pupil amount, what other changes, did you make other changes to the House's version of the formula?
Yes. We went through a number of them. Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I can just summarize for you. Obviously, the base funding formula amount, the K-3 literacy. One of the major changes we made there from both the governor's and the House proposal, they both proposed a per pupil amount in FY 14 and 15 equalized, meaning take that state and local share percentage, which I emphasized at the beginning, and then calculate that on the 300. We actually broke that apart, and we did 125, 175, meaning 125 in 14, 175 in 15, equalized, meaning that state and local share percentage would be applied. But then we also took outside of that $100 in 14 and $160 in 15 unequalized, meaning every student at every school district in the state of Ohio will get that much dollars per student inside the cap, obviously. That was a major change for us. It was a driver. As I mentioned to you before, we drove about $54 million more into that specific line item. And we did that because in combination with the cap, the previous question, it began to equalize more dollars throughout every district in the state of Ohio. And as we analyzed over 600 districts on these spreadsheets, multiple spreadsheets, probably over a dozen that we ran in the course of the last month or so, it looked to us like there was equalization happening in low wealth districts and high wealth districts to the tune that, it seemed fair and comparable across the state.
When will we see the final spreadsheet?
When you leave today.
I believe we have copies for you.
Now, again, you used the word final. You will see the preliminary spreadsheets. Yeah, the final you get to see next Thursday after we vote the bill. But from our perspective, we think we're close enough to land that barring some unanticipated issues that you always have when you deal with this many variables, we think we're at a point where we wanted to get out and start having the discussion.
How much more does this spend compared to the House?
On this portion alone, on this, the 612 district line,
$141.6 million. And as the president said, I mean, if you look at the overall
school districts
spreadsheet
only.
between the House and the Senate, I mean, and look at the available revenue we have maybe to appropriate on the Senate side across all of state government, this is essentially that amount. I mean, our caucus felt strongly enough about when we circle our wagons and talk about what's important to us, it's education. This investment in education is something that many of us have been here over a decade working to do, and I think the governor started the conversation in a great way. I think the House added to it, and this is where we decided to prioritize the investment.
Yes, this is a biennium total. Now remember, there are other numbers that we talked about in some of these presentations that are beyond this spreadsheet. For example, the early childhood and some of the other things like the straight A fund, which even increased that number up higher. I think in total it's 220 million or so.
So in essence, in all funds, when you see our omnibus and our spreadsheet on Tuesday, you'll see 141 million in the foundation funding formula line, and then the other projects that Senator Gardner and the President mentions, about an additional $80 million that we appropriate, for a total of about 221 additional millions of dollars we appropriated in the Senate version of the budget. Over the House, yes, sir.
Fast-growing school districts had a problem with the House plan that said it didn't provide enough money for them. Did you do anything with fast-growing school districts with that?
Sure, we increased the cap to 10.5% over the 6% the House used.
So you think that will satisfy?
Well, I don't know if it satisfies them. I mean, the question is no cap would probably satisfy them the most, but districts change their valuation for a number of reasons. Some districts lost value, some districts gained value. There are a number of variations. And just like they have variations and don't want a negative adjustment, hence the guarantee, it's very difficult for the state to adjust upwards as quickly. But it's certainly, I think most would think that this is a move in the right direction.
Generally, how have you found that the urban schools fare under your plan?
Most of the urban schools are under a guarantee. And so from that perspective, that's a different problem. Columbus, I think, actually gets more money.
There's increases.
And so, again, if the districts, the urban schools are going to be treated just like every other district with similar circumstances. So that's the scenario as to where they're at. If they're a district that's under the guarantee, they're going to be treated as under the guarantee. If they're a district that has factors, I think, like Columbus, I think they get significantly more money.
The root question I was going to ask, in your opinion, is this a constitutional school funding reform?
That's not a rude question. It's absolutely constitutional.
Could you elaborate why you think that? I mean, we're obviously still relying on property taxes,
Well, but remember, understand what the court said in DeRolf before they said, we're done with DeRolf because the legislature have made significant changes. That's the part that somehow hasn't been reported as often, but that's what the court said. The one issue in this funding formula is we equalize essentially between rich districts and poor districts. And we even gave you the helpful state share percentage on the side to see how that's done. Remember, the state baseline formula is an equalized number of where we're spending the money. And so this plan does that. We're effectively trying to reduce the differentiation between school districts. Remember, the DeRolf didn't say you can't rely on property taxes. But what it said is that you can't have a system that disproportionately provides inadequate resources to poor districts, and rich districts don't seem to have that problem.
And rich and poor, is that in terms of property wealth or is income rolled in as well?
Both.
Yeah, we continued what the governor started in terms of a primary emphasis on property valuation. We also continued with the concept that that's done in this version as was done in the House with a 3-year average. Because what happens in the state of Ohio is that triennial update. So you have a district that goes 0% increase in 1 year, 22% the next year because of triennial update, 0% the next. So we use a 3-year average to bend that example I just mentioned down to about a 7% overall.
Some of my districts.
Some districts in Mercer County in particular. So when you look
Not
at
until after we redone the formula.
when you look at this spreadsheet, and I have for many members and question specific districts, these 2 columns that talk about that percentage valuation on a 3-year average really gives you an indication as to where the state formula proposal, as we have it here, is driving dollars to districts. It's not about rich or poor. It's about their property valuation, yes, but it's about changes in that as well. So this formula, back to your constitutional question, I believe is not only constitutional, but I believe it's more fair and equal because it bends with the property valuation changes throughout the state and drives the dollars to the districts based on that primarily.
Are incomes of residents of the districts considered as well?
We looked at an income factor and actually trying to balance an income factor with the property valuation factor. And ultimately, I think it relied too heavily on local district share. And so, again, we went back to build on what the House and the Senate did, and now are at property valuation. I'm sorry, the governor and the House did, and now, riding with the property valuation, because I believe it is a true form of wealth out of all the other factors that you could equalize throughout the state and drive dollars to districts.
Other questions?
Has the funding for the increase after expansion been maintained or changed?
That is an issue that is outside of this discussion today. We're still considering that. Remember, I said we're still taking amendments until 4 o'clock today?
4 o'clock.
Before we consider the omnibus, so that's not something we're here to talk about yet.
Is there any performance-based funding?
No.
Are most districts going to see an increase or is there a flat line here?
Yes, there are guarantee districts. 176 districts are on the guarantee. And remember, you're on the guarantee for a lot of reasons. In some cases, it's because you've lost students. In some cases, significant student population loss. Some cases, you're on the guarantee because your property wealth, go back to your question, has gone up. And that would increase your local share and decrease your state share. Well, the guarantee essentially means you're going to get the same amount without regard to that adjustment. And so some districts, the answer is yes. But remember, as their local share went up, their local revenues also went up to account for that. So they'll have more resources to allocate. And if they've got a decreasing student population, they'll have more revenue per student to also allocate in the education of the students that are there. So that's where the guarantee kicks in. One more question, John tells me.
Have you changed the structure of the state straight aid fund at all? I noticed in the Subbill yesterday, there were quite a few remarks from that.
I think we've,
That's all.
Randy, I think that's essentially still under discussion, but essentially it's the same right now.
Yeah, the only thing we know for sure is that the Senate will invest more in the straight A fund, based on the testimony and based on the priorities of the caucus and in working with the governor. But in terms of the mechanics of the program, that's still something we're working on over the weekend, and we'll have more to say on Tuesday.
The numbers we mentioned to you anticipates a $50 million investment more in the Senate on the straight A fund?
At least.
So that offsets any of the discussion you're talking about, more than the House, yeah. I said at least. And so we're trying to figure that out, and part of that is the old discussion as to where we're gonna end and make sure everything works the way it should before we commit to our last decimal place penny.
That's over the biennium.
Yes. Yeah. Unless we said otherwise, I think the numbers we gave you were all biennium numbers. All right. Thanks a lot. We have the spreadsheets. Again, I urge extreme caution on using those numbers as the final product.